your light. Do you have a preference on which side?
Nah. Test, 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 test.
Good. Just for a second.
Okay. You're gonna give people till like 6:05 to filter in?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Ah. Is that our tech person? Yeah, okay.
Thank you so much.
Hi.
I think we're about set up. So if you want to see.
Okay. We think so.
Hi. Recording. I don't know where the recording goes. That's my notes. So, while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead.
Hopefully that'll work for you if that's kind of a side view.
Okay. So everything in its entirety is being recorded, like the little guy and the.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be. Yeah, it'll put it like down in the corner.
Okay.
Just make sure.
All right, that's a lot of wires. I'm like, does this scoot? No, it does not scoot. I'm not gonna scoot it.
So we are doing good. The only other thing I want to check here is the. So let's check that. Or if that's, can you just tap on it? All right, so that did not get recorded.
Okay.
Yep. I don't know why this is so. It must be just adjusting because of since you're not really talking much. As you talk, it should adapt here. Probably drop down by itself.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like you're all set to go.
All right. Thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
I heard it's a busy night in here tonight.
Yeah, it is. But that's okay.
You can make it if you want. Just point up,
Sure.
make sure stuff's working.
Yeah, I guess we can maybe do something like this. Off the corner. And water should go away.
It takes a second. There we go.
Thank you. When we're ready to get started, are you going to be like, hello? Okay.
You let me know. I'll do it.
All right.
Yeah, I guess when you hit record, they usually ask you if you want to do a cloud recording or.
Oh, I don't know.
I don't think it asked me. So I'm going to maybe the cloud.
So yeah, it's either going to your Zoom account or on the computer.
I'll find it.
Either way, we'll get it to you.
Cool.
Thanks.
All right. So I'm going to do you a quick favor. If you just want to stand in front of it. And just move on this story. Great.
Thanks.
Make sure you're head for that.
Yeah, I like that. That's cute.
because anytime someone takes a picture of me,
Okay. Okay. How dare you? So for the students in the room, how do you prefer to take notes? Does anyone need a notepad at this point? Because I've got some. This section isn't note heavy, but you'll definitely need one for the playwriting workshop. What was that? Yes, absolutely. Do you need a pen? There you go.
I didn't you?
Okay. All right, yeah, we'll give it a couple more minutes. All right.
Cool. I'm show up on our Instagram and our Facebook stories. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Give people some driver time.
No, I think I'm good. Is it just the space bar for the?
Yeah.
Okay.
Space bar, or you can use the key, or you can use the mouse if you want. So
Okay. Yeah. We're going with it.
You can't see me.
Yeah.
And did you have a chance to meet Elizabeth Reserve?
Yes. Like brighter, not bright.
I would just like it to be a little bit brighter.
Oh, I see. These are out. I see.
Eruption, I don't know. There, it's fine. That's fine.
I appreciate that.
I try and be theatrical in all this. I just pop up front, right back.
All right. That's a good idea. Leave the door ajar.
Yeah. Close the door to the theaters. You don't hear the jazz band. But I'm sure he does that.
Oh, thanks. Look, the gal in the blazer. This one. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming. My name is Dr. Pete Anderson, and I am the Assistant Professor of Acting and Directing. And I am pleased to welcome our visiting playwright, Deena Ronayne. Deena is coming to us. You'll be clapping in a second, everybody. I got to hold on. She will be our guest artist who is writing the play that will be taken to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this summer. First time that Northern's ever performed at what is the largest fringe festival in the world. This is exciting. We have thrilled to have so many people here from all over. We have some students here with community members. We have people taking pictures. Hey, wait, hold on. Thanks. Make sure I look skinny. All right, so I'm gonna pass it over to you. I'm gonna be back there. If you need to make any adjustments with volume or anything, just let me know.
All right,
Great,
thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Dr. Anderson, for that wonderful, warm welcome. I really appreciate your time, and it's really great to have a community that supports the arts the way that Aberdeen does, and it's really exciting to be part of Northern. So the way we're going to break this up is the first 30, maybe 40 minutes, depending on how this goes, will be a brief presentation that will include a little bit of my background and some information about the upcoming trip, and then a Q&A session, so if anyone is inclined. And then after that, we're going to do a playwriting workshop. So by the end of the evening, there will be at least one 10-minute play that we've created together. So let's get started. I begin every presentation that I do with this slide. These are flying fish and swimming birds. Two things that you don't necessarily think go together. But here it is in nature, and somehow they do, and it's completely natural. So if you stop and think about it, I'm sure there's a lot of things that exist really well that you don't think necessarily go together, but they do. People are multifaceted. How many of you in this room have more than one interest, more than one talent, more than one pursuit? It is a long life. You do? Oh my goodness, what are you interested in?
I'm a superheroologist in addition to being a theater, actor, director, scholar, historian, writer. I'm a busy man.
So that's like 18 things, and they can all live and be embodied in one person. I love it. That's going to be a major theme of what we discussed tonight. So here they are, flying fish and swimming birds. The other fish and birds make fun of them, or do they envy them? You know, we'll never know for sure. So that's just something to keep in your head. If you're fortunate during your career, there's an ebb and a flow where you struggle with not getting what you want, and you get what you want, and you're really excited about it, and then you want to give back. So it feels really, really good to be in that place, in that time here. And the support of the community is really important. So it's an honor to be here at Northern. I've done a few events since my time here. I'm actually relatively new. It's only been about 4.5 years. And people support and people show up. And it's really a nice thing. So what I hope to provide is perspective. This is an imperfect field, and I'm an imperfect example. Maybe we'll dispel some rumors about what it's like working in theater. We're going to get through all of these things, keeping this in mind, because none of these things are ever easy. Some may look glamorous. They may, in fact, be glamorous in certain moments. But the point is, develop enough courage so you can stand up for yourself and then stand up for somebody else. Because this is also a very communicative, enforced entity. The arts they're never standalone. Anything you do is important, no matter who sees it or who doesn't, but the community is really at the core of it. And the other thing that I want to remind everyone, and this will also be a theme, is that success is not linear, nor is it the same for everyone. So that's important to keep in mind no matter what you do. This is a picture of my hometown. I grew up in Chelmsford, Massachusetts. It's a community very similar to Aberdeen, similar in size, similar in community values, and also similar in the fact that it was supportive of the arts. So again, this theme here where your community, there's a lot to be grateful for. And I've lived in a few places, and it's not true for every community. There's not always a community theater. There's not always an emphasis among those around us for the arts. So we are very, very lucky in that capacity. But I look at this image and I think about where I am today, and I ask myself, what did I feel success meant at that age? If you think back to when you were a preteen or a teen, and you wonder, what does success mean at that age, especially if you're considering acting? For me, your scope can be very narrow. My assumption was that it's not success unless you're on Broadway. And that is actually very wrong. It's possible anywhere and everywhere in a level of success that you want. So these are some of the things that inspired me when I was a kid. This is a scene up here is a scene from White Christmas. And that was the best things happen when you're dancing. So I was about 4 when I first started watching that on a loop. It was an old movie, so it was around pretty much from years before I was born. But I remember my father coming in with groceries and making him sit down and watch this scene, even though he'd seen it a million times, and saying, I want to do this one day. I want to do partner dancing. I want to do shows and be a theater person. So that was one example. Over here is an image of Streetcar Named Desire. And also when I was about 4 or 5, at holidays, I would make my family members watch me do the Blanche Dubois monologue about aging. So I was 4 and I was like, physical beauty is passing, a transitory possession. And it was weird. But think back. What did you want to be when you grew up? What inspired you? There's always something. And my husband and I attended a flamenco show recently. It was in Spain. And I could see how people could easily dismiss it and say, this is touristy. It ain't Broadway. Personally, I was moved to tears. I found that these dancers put everything they had into this dance, body and soul. And it just reminded me of how easily you can be dismissed no matter how good you are. But it also reminded me how important it is to get the arts to people that would not otherwise see them. If someone wasn't a tourist, so what if it's touristy? Would they ever see a flamenco show? How many times have cultural events been brought here to Aberdeen? This is how people are inspired. When someone tells a story that is on Broadway and they say, gee, I was living in a rural area and I was 8 or 9 and my grandma took me to the city and took me to see West Side Story and their life has changed forever. Even if you are living in a small place and the things that come aren't that frequent or aren't that glamorous, hopefully it still happens or you have an opportunity to be inspired. Also, what does art mean if everyone reacts differently to what they see or at different points in their life? The reactions are different. So ironically, I started my art career writing. This was a poem I wrote, I think, in the 7th grade. And it's come full circle. It's what I'm concentrating on now. And I never would have figured that. I also did pageants. I did a experience called Presidential Classroom. I did cheerleading. And these things broadened my horizons. They're just as important as time on stage. If you're an actor, if you're interested in the arts, how often are actors asked, do you have any special skills? Do you play baseball? Do you fence? Do you swim? There are commercials, there are things you need to identify with. Having multiple skills doesn't take away from your time on stage. Yes, there are people that are on stage from the time they're 4 years old. There are also people that didn't start until very late. Everything that you do is going to add value because theater is not about theater. I personally, for the most part, don't like plays about theater people because a lot of times they're kind of pretentious. And who really wants to hear about that? Theater is about life and you have to experience it to live it. So all of these are valuable experiences. I call this my experience jumble because once again, it's a long life and it doesn't matter where you start, just where you finish. So it's purposely cluttered and that is intentional because it makes sense at the end. I went from an undergraduate in sociology to a master's in criminal justice. Not sure if I'd ever use any of them, but it still broadened my horizons. I ended up doing a lot of work in modeling, in which you're not supposed to think or speak or move, but that was the meat and potatoes of my career in the arts at first. I did a lot of dancing, which led me to an experience with Tim Tebow, which was also very cool. And then I kind of graduated to a production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and that was in Orlando, Florida, with a group called Theater Downtown. And in spite of my undergraduate and my master's degree existing, 2008 was actually a very difficult time for the public sector. And I had difficulty finding work in spite of a master's degree. And oddly enough, it was the thing in the arts that consistently paid me. And it was also work in marketing, in public relations, in PR, customer service, things of that nature. So when I did Cuckoo's Nest, it was a great group of people. And that's how I learned about Fringe Festival, which we'll get into. But it also really didn't take me long to figure out that if I'm going to be involved in the arts more heavily, I want to decide what projects that I'm doing, and that equals producing. Hence the launch of my company. It was formerly Hardly Working Productions, but it is now Hardly Working Promotions. When I moved here, I was pretty convinced that I would have to drop the majority of my artistic endeavors, and that turned out to be completely untrue. But the name still works because you promote shows when you're in them. That's a major job of a producer. So the mission statement: embrace your extraordinary gifts and relinquish an ordinary life. If you have talents and you have interests that are beyond the norm, how can you really truly expect to just fit in, be satisfied, do the normal thing, live in the ordinary? You can't. And that's all right. If you've got extraordinary gifts, you're going to live a life that's a little odd to a lot of people. And that's all right. Embrace it. So this is the company mission statement. I'll read it for the sake of those on Zoom. And also inflection kind of helps people understand where you're going with intention. So, are you working hard or hardly working? Who hasn't been asked that question when running into an old friend or fussing with multiple projects? Although most of us would shy away from saying we're hardly working, the spirit of this company is built around the notion that if you're doing something you love, the work is enriching, rewarding, and lots of fun. Hardly Working Promotions is a hybrid concept. We are dedicated to putting up fun, unique, and intriguing shows in the arts and entertainment realm. We are also proudly serving our clients who have followed their passion in other industries by providing a broad range of marketing, PR, and promotional services. Hardly Working Promotions was founded on January 29th, 2018, and since then we have conducted business in the Central Florida area, Atlanta, Boston, the Midwest, and collaborated with corporations in the UK, Alaska, Australia, and Canada. We're looking forward to working with you. So this page is a list of the shows and accolades that have come about since the inception of the company. But word of warning with this, awards are nice, but they're not everything. And if everyone's seen Cool Runnings, first place is a wonderful thing, but if you're not enough without it, you won't ever be enough with it. The other thing is it sets an exceptionally high bar for any project you consider after. So my takeaway with this is it's wonderful, it's great to be acknowledged, but don't let it dictate what you do next, because it certainly isn't everything. And the other thing to consider is a lot happened during this time. I began this company when I was still living in Florida. So during all this time for these shows, there was time in Boston. There was a move to South Dakota. There was a brief shift from marketing versus shows versus marketing versus shows. There was COVID. So a lot of troubles and different aspects go into what you're seeing. It's easy to just look at the titles and the awards, but this took time, and it also involved a lot of people. If you'll notice, there's names under here that are certainly not mine. These are people I was fortunate enough to be willing to work with me. They reflect a lot of talent. I will say one thing, they don't occur if you don't put yourself out there. That is a key proponent to having any type of promotional or production minded nature. Mae West was famous for saying, "I couldn't wait for success, so I went ahead without it." It's that type of thing where if you believe in something, you have to let people know. And whether or not people show up, that's something else. Whether or not there's awards attached to it, that's something else too. Getting it out there, especially in the days of websites and social media, you can at least make it known that your effort level is high. So I'm sure a lot of you noticed that a lot of those titles look a little weird. They're what we call Shakespeare mashups, and they turned out to be wildly popular. That's why we did so many of them. We did Shakespeare's Ghostbusters and Aliens, and we will delve into the details of those in a moment. But the meaning of a mashup is a mixture of fusion or disparate elements. So Pride and Prejudice and zombies, two things that really don't go together, but were really popular. The company Michelin is famous for tires, but they also offer ratings for stars for fine dining. You know, when I think of truckers, I certainly think of fine dining, but it works and it's really famous. Yamaha does both pianos and motorcycles. My company, promotional work and theatrical productions, each one of you, more than one thing, and that's okay. It's kind of awesome, actually. We ended up doing so many of the mashups because they were recognizable, they were fun, they made Shakespeare approachable, and they were at fringe festivals. And fringe festivals are meant for kind of fun, artsy, different things, and they were wildly successful. I also owe a lot of this to my co-producer. I had the idea for the first one, and then he ran with the idea for the additional 4. Just a fun Shakespeare fact. Shakespeare himself was a mashup. When he was in London, he was a famous playwright, famous actor, but he lived in Stratford and he owned businesses and he owned property. Is anyone here a Shakespeare person? Yay, the eager young man in the front. Can you think of any examples of mashups in his plays or poetry, things that don't necessarily go together but work?
Probably I would say that a bunch of his plays he adapted from other sources, particularly things like Midsummer Night's Dream, taking the theater, mixing it with these existent myths and turning into commentary on working life.
Perfect, exactly. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so this is the first show that I did through HWP. I was in Toronto, and it was during the Fringe Festival, and I wasn't officially scouting shows, but I came across Shakespeare's Ghostbusters. And those gentlemen in Toronto did it as a staged reading, and it was still sold out every single time. So I was sitting next to someone who knew one of the players, and I said, I'm interested in licensing this from them. I'm from Orlando, I'm involved with the Orlando Fringe, I am starting a company, I want to produce this. And this was my first endeavor. I didn't say, I'm a producer, I'm scouting, because that would have been deceitful. But I said what I said with a lot of confidence. And sure enough, she got me in touch with them right away, and they were thrilled about letting us license it. It didn't matter that I was brand new. What mattered was that I took a lot of tender, loving care with their piece. That's what mattered. And their vision was, it was a stage reading. So people were in black outfits and they still had their scripts in hands. So we took it to a whole other level. We had the narrator in the Shakespearean, the rest of the costumes were kind of a mix between 80s and steampunk. We had full lighting, full costume, full prop, and it was an absolute hoot. I actually played Slimer, and I had no lines whatsoever. And I played the other ghost too. I have never had more fun on stage where I had 0 lines. It was awesome. This was Shakespeare's Terminator 2nd. Everybody was expecting a comedy out of us, and this was a sci-fi drama. So we took a really big risk with this, and it ended up winning for Pam's depiction of Sarah Connor. So the assumption was that everyone was giggling when they were waiting in the audience when we opened. And then it was deadly silent during the whole thing. So we were really nervous. And then finally at the end, there was this huge raucous of applause, and the gamble worked. People were expecting comedy. We knew that. And they could have not liked it, but it ended up okay. So that was also a lot of fun. Another sci-fi. We went a little darker with Shakespeare's Reservoir Dogs. And at this point, people weren't sure what to expect, because if those of you who are familiar with the film, it's very dark. And a lot of the language is really, it was never in fashion, but it's really, really, really out of fashion now. And it's very, very bloody. So we did our best. We knew people weren't sure what to expect. And what ended up happening was a version that was a little easier for people to digest, because there wasn't so much blood and there was 0 use of the F word. And the tale ended up being so completely Shakespearean that we got a lot of feedback that it was captivating. So again, it was a gamble. And no, not everyone liked it, because by the time you do something a third mashup, you're going to have people with favorites. And that's okay too. That's completely fine. This was our cursed show, our little problem child. The rest is silence. This was done during COVID. It had to be shelved twice during COVID. However, we ended up with a film version that is still being pitched to film festivals that did really well at its first film festival. And it was a joy to make because this was the first one where my staff wrote the script. The Ghostbusters was Toronto folks, and the other two were people from Nashville and from Australia. So the project was still important, even though we had challenges. And sometimes with these challenges, you have to know where to shift. This was our last one, Shakespeare's Aliens. And it had a lot of challenges because Orlando Fringe last year ended up becoming a super spreader event. However, once again, we stepped it up, did a lot of set, which you don't normally do at a Fringe, did a lot of sound, did a lot of lighting. And those who enjoyed it really enjoyed it. Those who didn't enjoy it said, you know what? I liked another one better. And it's all good. That's all okay. This was actually the first piece that I did solo without my Orlando cast and crew. So again, there's so much of this goes into just putting yourself out there. The man who wrote this was the guy who was overseeing the project when I did it in Orlando, and I was a cast member. And I approached him and said, hey, I have a new company. I want to put this up in Boston. And he said, okay. And he paid me to do it. I asked, and he said yes. The worst thing he could have said was no. And here I was with a show in Boston after doing a show in Orlando. And this was a particularly important piece. It actually won a Getchell Award. And it was about the thalidomide crisis of the 1960s. So those of you unfamiliar with that, there was a drug that was German, and this German company dropped it out of nowhere, and no one could figure out why, because it was supposed to be this miracle drug that helped with headaches, that helped with upset stomach, that helped with anxiety, that apparently helped pregnant women with morning sickness. And what ended up happening was a lot of miscarriages and a lot of deformations with infants in birth, particularly arms and legs. And there was a whistleblower, and that lady was actually from right here in South Dakota. Triple bypass was a game changer, done during COVID, product of COVID, and it was right here in Aberdeen. So when I realized I couldn't produce, I wanted to do something. I had one 10-minute piece. It was Seeking Dignity that had gone up at another festival prior, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to have 3 10-minute pieces, all with a similar theme. So I rapid fire wrote the other 2, got feedback from people right here in Aberdeen, and we put it up and we filmed it, and it went through 14 different virtual festivals. You might recognize a person or 2 that's up here. It was a lot of fun to do, and it was very different. And as soon as we could, we did put it up here live. And then it went through the Orlando Fringe with a local cast and crew there, and then through Ed Fringe with a local cast and crew there. So full disclosure, when I first started doing this, I didn't know what a producer was. I didn't know what they did. I knew it was important. So now when I give this talk, especially to my little ones, but it transposes here. Actually, it's very effective. The 3 main responsibilities of producer are faces, hands, and butts. Number 1, faces. Hiring smart, reliable, and talented cast and crew. That's number 1. You have to get a team with you that's willing to work with you and be just as excited about your project as you are. 2, that's the hands. Raising funds to cover it. If productions depended on ticket sales alone, there would be no theater. And there's no shame in this. It is the nature of the business, and this is a business, and it's a tough business. So sponsorship and other backing is very important, and it's an art. 3rd, butts, marketing the performance to the audiences. So I'm fond of saying that you can have the cure for cancer, but what good is that if no one knows about it? So you have to market, you have to get people to know about it. You know what? Even if a ton of people don't show up, the community still knows about it, and that has value. The other important thing to keep in mind is it's important to show up for your fellow artists as well. It's not always possible, but it's important. So for those taking notes that are interested in producing, we've got the 3 C's, the 3 T's, the 3 B's, and the 3 P's. So first one, cast, crew, creative. All of this is you want to keep in mind that actors and directors get approached for projects, but the producers create them. But they also bear the responsibility for overseeing the entire project. So this is kind of an easy way to break down a project in its entirety. You got cast, crew, creative for the 3 C's. You've got the 3 T's. This involves your finances. When you're dealing with something that you want to do, and there's only so much money for what you need, and only so much money for what you want, you have to decide what kind of person you are. Are you a toy person, meaning you want the glitzy costumes, you want the glitzy lights? Are you a time person, meaning you want the longer run, you want the better options for your rehearsals? Or are you a tight person? You want to save the money where you can and save it up for other shows for emergencies. So that's definitely consideration if you're considering producing. We've got the 3 B's. This pertains to accessing your talent. This can be a small community. It can also be a little xenophobic. You know, the painting people don't want to play nice with the opera people. They don't want to play nice with the stage actors. Well, you know what? We all have to play nice. And when you're dealing with folks that are multi-talented, like we've been discussing, often you're contending with the 3 B's. People are broke, meaning they have to take straight jobs and they don't have time to necessarily do something a little more artsy. They're burnt out, meaning they take every project possible and they're just at their standing point. Or they're busy, meaning they're still taking every project possible and they can't squeeze you in. So this is definitely a contender. What my advice would be is plan. Pitch your idea, do it as early as possible, get people excited about it. The 3 P's are producing, if you want a 4th one, PR, program, and publicity. So public relations is attending events like this and chatting and saying, you know, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. What are you up to? Always ask that first. And then when they ask back, say, oh yeah, I got this project. It's going to be fun. Here's more information or how to get more information. You got to schmooze. It's an important part of being a producer. It's not for everybody, but it is important. Program. It might seem old fashioned, but even if you do one online, it's still important to have, especially for your sponsors. You want to have a program that looks official. It doesn't have to be from Playbill, but it's got to have a proper who's who. It's got to have the cast and crew. It's got to have acknowledgments. These are the things that'll step you up a notch and make you look more official, even if you are just starting out. And publicity. There's lots of ways you can slice this that are cost efficient, that don't take up all of your time, but you never want to ignore it. You never want to assume a Facebook invite is enough. So for setting yourself up for success, I'm going to give a little prelude before we actually start the playwriting section as well. I'll give a little playwriting prelude, but for producing, I want to say this won't work for everyone. All I can do is tell you what worked for me. So for extension on the faces, hands, butts thing, more detailed description of duties include choosing the art, venue coordination, staffing coordination, show finances, fundraising, publicity, quality control, problem solving, mitigation. So if you're fortunate, you've got a dramaturg, you've got a production manager, you've got a competent stage manager, maybe even an assistant stage manager. But ultimately, for the producer, it is on you. It's squarely on you. Program Ads for Businesses is not asking for charity. What you offer has value. It's hard to ask people for money. It's really hard. It can be embarrassing. You can be worried about a no. But what you're presenting is not, hey, I need help. What you're presenting is, hey, I've got a show and people from these demographics are expected to be there. People that have these skills are expected to be there. People that are interested in potentially your business are expected to be there. They will want to advertise. It is not charity. You're offering something of value. The other thing I would recommend is going official. Now, even with things like Fringe festivals, a lot of people just say, hey, you know, this is my name, this is so-and-so productions. They don't have to have an official company. If you want to take producing seriously, I would recommend it. An official LLC, an actual website, because not everyone goes on social media. Actual press releases to accredited media. That is also very important. And yeah, it can be kind of a pain. And you worry about looking inflated. You worry about looking like, oh, look at me. This is how it's done. And people might respond, they might not, but still they know you're out there. Official reviewers, that's also really important. Reach out to them. Organize your reviews so people can see them, even if it's just a snippet. You can put that on your website. You can ask people to put it on Google Review. It adds up. Social media presence is important, but if you want to lift it to that professional level, that's the way it should go. Website success, a good IT person is it's really key. If you don't have a dedicated one, which I know costs money, try to keep these things listed in mind for what you want to do with your digital print, because that's what most people see. That's what's lasting. Finally, photograph and video everything. Make trailers, behind the scenes photos. Just a good category of what you've done is very, very valuable. These are common challenges. And the other thing I want to remind everyone is you're involved in theater, not theatrics. So there's a lot of assumptions that just because you're in theater, that there's going to be drama and there's going to be, fainting spells and there's going to be screaming and there's going to be affairs. If you're the producer, you really need to keep a close eye on that. Theater, not theatrics. Resist the urge to cast yourself. Does everybody remember the Jeopardy debacle, where they were trying to cast and trying to cast and trying to cast when Alex Trebek passed away? And people hated it when the producer said, "Oh, I'll just do it." Resist that urge. Yes, you're in charge. Yes, it's great to have your own work out there, anything you want, because you're the producers. Try not to cast yourself. If you really want to do that, please consider a co-producer. The elements that are producing that are cut above, which we touched on a little bit already, is diplomacy, professionalism, responsibility, accountability, the high road. You're going to meet the dramatic people. You're going to apologize for things you didn't do. You're going to pay for things you didn't break. Yeah, it kind of stinks, but it's part of bringing it to a higher level. This one's tough. And for people starting out, this is an important thing to pay attention to. Unless you're a licensed not-for-profit community theater, it's not okay to expect your cast, crew, creative team to work for free. Money's tight. It has to go in a lot of places. But what you can do is offer your cast, crew, and creative constitution. If you can't pay them well or you can't pay them, the project isn't only yours. It can't be. It can be collaborative, and that's all right. Just make sure it's always upfront. The rules of what is politically correct change and evolve in terms of casting, scene depiction, a lot of other things, and that's a good thing. Keeping it up with it is your responsibility. Not the responsibility of the writers, not the responsibility of the actors, not the responsibility of the audience to point it out to you. It is the producer's responsibility. Keep in mind if you're doing an older show especially. Finally, quitting is not the same as realizing something's untenable. We talked about the Silence of the Lambs show. We tried and tried and tried. It managed for a few things. It was not meant at this time to be a live show. Pushing further would have been a mistake. Admitting that there are too many problems for it to be tenable was the correct decision. That's different from a failure. Try to keep that in mind when you're faced with these challenges. This has been my advice for pretty much my entire life. Show up, follow through. It's downright ridiculous, the things that I've been involved in, simply because I turned up and said, "Hi, I'm Deena, I'm breathing. I have an interest in this." People say, "Okay, great, you're in." It can be hard, but it's part of putting yourself out there. And putting yourself out there does not necessarily mean that your ego is puffed. It means you're approachable. It means you know your skill set. It means you have a genuine interest in being part of something and contributing. This slide is purposely jumbly and confusing and kind of wild, because fringe festivals are kind of purposely jumbly and confusing and kind of wild. So I'm going to give you a second to absorb all this, but the long and the short of it is that fringe festivals, which is what we're here to discuss and what we're preparing for, they are an unjuried collection of art at all levels. So it's a festival featuring alternative or experimental performances and exhibition. So it can be anything from spoken word, storytelling, dance, singing, artists that have been around for years and years and years, newcomers, can be all of those things. These are just an example of some cities that it could be. The important thing about fringes is it's a way to have a built-in audience for new work. It's unjuried. And what I mean by that is sometimes festivals are themed. So they are Shakespeare or they're local artists. Fringes are completely unjuried. There's no one at the top saying, "This is art, this is not art. I want to work with this person, I don't want to work with this person." So the playing field is a level. You are either assigned a venue by lottery or you simply sign up for a venue. And that makes it affordable, it makes it accessible, And it's also short play format. Rarely there'll be a show that's about 90 minutes. Most of them are under an hour. So the audiences can experience all sorts of things. These are some excerpts from the Edinburgh Fringe. This is the largest in the world. It's one of the oldest, if not the oldest. In August, when this is run, Edinburgh goes from a population of about 500,000 to a population of 1.6 million because of all the people that come in for both this festival and the military tattoo, which is what's depicted in the middle. There's also an arts festival, that whole main strip where we see Emily with her triple bypass accessories. That's called the Royal Mile. There's artists there pitching their shows, handing out flyers. There's fire dancers. It is all sorts of fun. It's very large, very well respected, and very international. Some of you are here because of our upcoming study abroad program. The details of this will be from Professor Files and Professor Anderson, but here's a breakdown of what you can expect. You're going to get credit for it. Community members can attend. This is a commitment, yes, especially financially, but I encourage you to talk to Dr. Anderson or talk to any other professor that's involved in study abroad about grants, about scholarships. Again, it's a matter of planning and it's a matter of following up. These details can be found on the web, and we can have more Q&A about them this evening. The show we're bringing is called the Canonized Club. I'm on the second draft, and I'm accepting a lot of feedback, as much as I can take, because it'll get better with the more people see it. So the theme is the Canonized Club and the Curious Lives and Deaths of the Saints. This is a little small, so I'll read it. It's 1969, and Pope Paul VI, much to the chagrin of many holy spirits, has made an announcement that puts into question where the Catholic saints stand. Upheaval in the heavens abound as the saints pitch their case to remain in the exclusive Canonized Club. Based on scholarly research of theological accounts, we tell these stories of the blessed and often cursed with a gentle irreverence that will tickle your funny bone, touch your soul, and lift your spirit. So this will be an ensemble piece. We're going to talk about a lot of saints, but there will be a key core cast that will do a lot of these roles. And this is very fringy because it's something people will recognize, but in a format that's kind of new and fun. So we're going to get into a little bit of a teaser of the writing workshop. So those of you who are staying, please make notes at this point. This is a jar of condensation. So I was in the third grade and I got a science question wrong on a test because the question was asking what happens with a jar when it's cold and when the outside's hot. And I said it leaked. And it's because I didn't know the word. So I vowed then and there in the third grade that I would never have that problem again. Words are very important. And as writers, quite frankly, it is all we have. So again, I am new at this. I only started playwriting recently. This is not gospel. I am telling you what worked for me. You have to find out what works for you. If there's a crossover, fabulous. If you want to get rid of some of this, that's completely your prerogative. I had to flee the UK when COVID first happened. I was there, I was trying to do a writing retreat and a little photo shoot. Didn't work out that way. But the guy at the place I was staying, he was kind of this older gentleman that ran this location, this venue for many, many years. And he met a lot of writers. He told me that writing is like digging a hole. Whether it's a spade or a quarry, you're still a writer. And don't let anyone take that away. Even if millions of people read your book or your plays, if you keep it to yourself, you're still a writer. And that has value. The writer is 1/4 of the art. That is what you can control. Nothing else. Nothing. It is then open to interpretation from the director, creative team, the actors, and the audience members. This is a good thing. Put your ego aside. If you get feedback that's negative, you can work on it. Or you can say that's that person's interpretation. But this should be exciting. When I see work I wrote that other people are interpreting and stuff I never would have thought of, I think it's very cool. So you have to get a little bit of a thicker skin. And you can take it with a grain of salt too. Sometimes you'll take the criticism and change things. Sometimes you won't. All that's okay. Point 3, it doesn't matter all that much what's in our heads when we write if that thought or idea doesn't convey, because the point is changed or lost if it isn't clear to the viewers. You know what? I could have been much clearer with that sentence. So hopefully you understand it a little more than I do rereading it. I think what I'm getting at is that as a writer, you're like, okay, I have this whole vision in my head. This is how I'm going to get it out. But if you're not actually getting it out and the people in the audience are confused, does it really matter what's in your head? Probably not as much. So it's just something to consider. This one's important. You can write for a certain audience, but you can't pick your audience. So sure, have an audience in mind. That's great. But who shows up, shows up. And they might not be the ideal people that you think will enjoy your piece perfectly, but so what? There might be someone who just came randomly and they're like, wow, I never would have gone to something like this. And I found it, something that really brought me outside of the box. So there's always good things to come from that. And sure, write with an audience in mind, that's fine. But just you can't place those people in your seats all the time. Beware of soapboxing and villainizing. If you're going to write a protagonist or a villain, put yourself in their shoes. It's really easy to be like, oh, there's the evil person, blah, 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 that only has the evil things in mind. And what have we learned? People are multifaceted. It is not always that simple. So with that, consider taking motivation further. There's internal motivation versus external motivation. There's real versus perceived. How many times have you been like, oh, does everyone hate me all of a sudden? And it's in your head. So that could portray in a character. The triad of human nature can be insecurity, compassion, and human nature. So if someone is on the brink if your character is on the brink of making a decision, they're dealing with their own insecurities, compassion over what's going on in human nature. So if someone randomly helps the bad guy, you think, oh, why did they do that? Well, maybe it's compassion. If someone seems good and then they make a horrible decision, you go, oh, why did they do that? Well, human nature. So try to consider those things when you're writing, and that's later draft stuff. You don't have to worry about that first draft. Also, what people think is right or wrong, that's subjective. There's lots of things that are right or wrong that are subjective. So when you're writing, sure, things can seem black and white, but they may not convey that way to the audience. Your actor might not feel that way. And if you want to think about things a little further, think about your character thinking about it that way. So final point with that, whether we like it or not, fear is a motivator. It's a motivator in what we do professionally. It's a motivator in how we express ourselves creatively. It can be a motivator for your characters. So this part is a little more kind of artsy, but if you want to think critically about your themes, there's stuff that's obvious, that's on the surface, or things that people say, oh, is it really about this? Or I end up thinking about this. My big example is always The Crucible. On the surface, it's about witch trials. You think about it a little more. It's about mass hysteria, superstition, power struggles. You think about it a little more. It's an allegory. This was about McCarthyism. It wasn't about witches. This is deep stuff when you think about your writing. These aren't first draft things, but it's just stuff to keep in mind. If you're staying for the workshop, I highly recommend you write this down. What the audience sees versus what the writer must create. You take any show, the audience sees, like, someone give me an example of a show.
Eurydice.
Which one?
Eurydice, our next play.
Okay, I'm gonna have you answer these then. Title.
Eurydice.
What's the beginning?
They're at the beach.
What's the middle?
He's dead.
What's the end?
He's dead.
What's the plot?
He's trying to get to her. She's dead.
See, there you go. What the writer must create.
A little more involved.
Yeah, well, that's due to everything that kind of clinks in your brain beforehand. What the writers must create. So the title's actually an illusion. What does the title actually allude to? It's still on you. To the person. Okay. The beginning. That's an investment. We know who these people are. Why do we care? What's the investment?
Seeing people in love and trying to connect and then running into problems.
Awesome. Middle, the conflict, the problems, right?
Lord of the Underworld decides if he'd like to marry her.
Well, damn.
Yeah, and she's
Yeah.
meanwhile her other husband's trying to get back, and there's some other stuff with father. There's a lot of problems.
Yeah, so other stuff. Yeah. The end, resolution.
Everybody dead.
It happens. Plot is actually the theme, the moral, or the message. Is there a moral other than everybody dead? Maybe.
Sorry, I have trouble with moral. I see the themes that what you willing to sacrifice for what you love?
Well, there you go. So that's an example, a living, breathing example of something being put on by Northern in about a month, where the audience sees title, beginning, middle, end, plot. The artists have to put all this work into it, and the writer has to create all these underlying issues. So before we wrap up, I do feel it's important to touch on this. It's very easy for me to stand up here and say, hey, here I am lecturing, this is my career. Failures and embarrassing stories are extremely valuable. They are part of who I am. They're part of what built me. They're part of everyone's experience. So yes, I have frozen on stage. I was doing Psycho Beach Party, and I was in a really bad habit of only learning my cue lines. So I would wait for my cue lines, and I was playing kind of a beach bunny. So I was, flipping my hair, listening for my cue line, listening for my cue line. All of a sudden, my co-star gets in my face and says, let's go to the malt shop. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. So I just turned to him and said, what? And then I realized somebody should have been on stage, and she wasn't. So he's like, yeah, let's go to the malt shop. And I was like, I don't know about this. So yeah, I froze. I was no help whatsoever. Thankfully, my co-star was able to get it together. And when this girl finally did get on stage, her line ironically was, I've been looking all over for you. And we're all like, really? Thanks for that. Yes, I have forgotten the words to a song during an audition, and it was really fun. This was for an open call for Orlando Fringe before I was affiliated with a specific company. And I sang the theme to Laverne and Shirley a cappella. And I was all excited about it, and a few people recognized it, and I'm in the middle of it. And then I went, oh, and I started up again. And the audience burst out laughing. The audience full of people casting burst out laughing. Wouldn't that be the worst thing to ever happen to an actor, that everyone looking at your audition is laughing at you? It was awesome. And then later when someone's like, oh, I don't have a song, somebody was like, sing Laverne and Shirley. So if you're comfortable with flowing through a mistake and you're in a comfortable environment, it's all good. You're okay. Yes, I've fallen off stage. I fell off a black box. How is that possible, you ask? Since a black box doesn't have any kind of ledge whatsoever, it's possible, I promise. It was 10-minute pieces, and I was doing the dance interlude to kind of introduce each one. And we had to change a tiny bit of choreography right before, and there was someone with a cane. And I went to do the exit, the old exit, realized my mistake, went to do the new exit, and fell over the cane and literally rolled out the door. So I fell off stage. It happens. It happens to literally everybody. Yes, I had something fly out of my nose. You can guess what? We were doing an improv, and I thought it'd be funny to pretend I was digging in my nose because we were pretending to be kindergartners. Then something made me laugh, and both directions flew right out of my nose. This was in high school, and high school is difficult with embarrassing moments anyway. I thought it was over. That was my freshman year. Senior year, a freshman comes up to me and goes, look in my locker. And it was a little story about what happened. I don't know who wrote it. So 4 years later, it came back to haunt me in another freshman's locker. So that's pretty funny. Failures. Yes, I had to pause my graduate studies. This was when online classes were new. I had an A in this course. I only had to take the final. I left to go home, to go to Massachusetts. I was living in Florida at the time, and I forgot my book. So I just started the final thinking, I have an A, I'm fine. I opened that final and it said turn to page 47, which naturally I couldn't do. I contacted the instructor, and the way it was set up at the time was, well, you began the final. I can't reverse that. It brought my whole average down to a D. And I had to stop the program because my GPA dropped. Yes, it was miserable. Yes, I took a year off trying to deal with it. But that year ended up being so important. I job shared with another girl. I traveled. I did a lot of modeling and dancing. And I got back into the program and I graduated with honors. It happens. It happens more often than you think. And you can get through it. Yes, I had to drop out of a show. I signed up for a Christmas Carol because everybody I knew was signing up. And then the second I was cast, I realized that I had way too many things falling in my lap during the Christmas season. So I had to put my tail between my legs and call the director and be like, I overextended. I'm really, really sorry. I caught it early. And he was okay with it. He was able to recast me. It happens. If you find yourself in this position, really think hard before your audition, and really, really, really look at your schedule to make sure that you can do it. Yes, I had to shelf a project. During COVID, I also wrote a book about the Golden Girls. It was this close to being published. And then I got word from Disney, who owns the intellectual property, that even though an encyclopedia type thing is typically considered fair use, they considered it an infringement. And I had to stop. And yeah, I cried. And everyone who worked on it cried. But you know what would have been worse? A lawsuit from Disney. That would have been terrible. So I consider this project shelved because there are ways for me to try to battle this, to try to petition for it. And when I'm ready, I'll try again. And that's also okay. Yes, I had to cancel a show. We touched on that already with Shakespeare's Silence. And it was the right decision. Maybe it'll happen again in the future, maybe it won't, but it was still the right decision. And again, not the end of the world. So with FAQ, I lecture a decent amount, and these are the questions that I typically get. How do you know when to take risks? So I think that ignoring adversity is a cliche. It really is. There are jobs, there are family members. Sometimes the family members aren't in great health. There's other financial considerations. A big part of what I do, what your stage manager does, is a risk mitigation. So first of all, what does that risk mean? It typically means the quintessential, when do I know to go for it? Figure out pros and cons, do your risk mitigation, figure out what success means to you. Second point, how do you get through rejection? First thing is you get through it graciously. Don't be a brat if you're rejected. That being said, as much as I loathe quoting a Kardashian, the mama Kardashian, Christina, yeah, Chris, thank you. She said something that resonated with me, which is if someone's telling you no, you're talking to the wrong person. So that's all right to keep in mind too. It may be, especially with theater, it may be more about what they have in mind than what you're presenting. And that happens and it stinks, but it happens. How do you know if a job or a gig is right for you? So obviously put your best foot forward, attempt things that are available, bloom where you're planted. However, this is most definitely a two-way street. If you find yourself in an audition and people are snobby, or their communication is terrible, or they have a reputation for not paying their creative team on time, or the amount they agreed to, just because you want to act and be involved doesn't mean you have to settle for things like that. So try to be aware of red flags, and that's okay. And yeah, you might miss out on something that seems really cool, but it might be an absolute headache. So you got to consider those things. How do you get through creative block? I switch mediums. If you're a painter, read. I also believe if you want to write, you have to read. So switch mediums, take a break for sure. The other thing that's kind of fun to do is pretend you have a deadline. So if you're working on something and it's just for fun, and you say to yourself, okay, if this was due in half an hour, what would I put forward? And even if it's garbage, that's all right. What's your go-to advice for students interested in theater? So as we've realized, it's so much more than Broadway. It's so much more than Broadway. Most people in this field hold other jobs. Most people, not all, but most. And there's no shame in that. That's perfectly acceptable. Don't be impressed by when you see something that says, write, directed, produced, starring in, and it's one person. That looks impressive. But honestly, what's behind that a lot of the time is that they couldn't get a producer to pay for it. They couldn't get people to sponsor it. They had to put up their own money to do it. So yeah, it looks impressive. I can write, I can star in something, I can produce something. Well, you also couldn't get the people to collaborate with you. So be happy for folks, let them do their thing, but just be careful about comparing yourself. You never want to compare yourself too much. Be happy for your fellow artists, support them. Showing them support does not mean there's less for you. It's not pie. Support your fellow artists, but don't try to keep up with them. Don't try to keep up with the Joneses, because the odds are the Joneses, they're broke, or they could very well be broke. What would your 13-year-old self think of what you're doing? Would it make your 13-year-old self proud? Will it bring you forward in your pursuit of fabulous? My final point is there's an old movie called The Agony and the Ecstasy, and it's about Michelangelo, who wanted to paint. He didn't want to paint, he wanted to sculpt, ended up getting hired to paint. He had to switch mediums. And this was for the Sistine Chapel, one of the most famous things in existence. And he was miserable the whole time. And then one of the other Ninja Turtles came along and said, you know what? artists need patrons. So if you end up doing something that isn't for you specifically or not exactly what you want to do, but you're being paid to do it, consider it a challenge, do it to the best of your ability, and consider it as a growing experience. So that's it for me. Anyone have any questions? Thank you so much for having me.
Just give a round of applause.
Thank you.
I'm curious for the Edinburgh show. What was your motive? Like, what was the germinating thing to do a show about saints?
I was in Austria, and my husband and I were touring an abbey in Melk, and they had sections with unnamed, unknown saints. And we kept walking around going, well, how do we know they're saints? Like, what is this? Like, and we kept going, and there was no photography, no talking, no laughing. And every time we hit one, I'd kind of whisper to him and say, oh, he's totally saint. Well, how do you know? I mean, he's fabulous, and he's here. So it resonated with me. How much do we really know about these things? How much can you get humor out of this and still keep it authentic? So that was the little seed. And then I picked up a book about the lives of the saints. And some of it is kind of zany, but it's still inspiring. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, wowie, this stuff writes itself. So that was the original thought.
Are you working on writing anything else? I know you got that first show coming up. You have sometimes like an idea. I still have like 3 or 4 different experiences now. Do you have other projects going on now as well?
Not exactly, but sort of. A friend of mine and I we're cutting an album. So I'm doing lyrics, and that's kind of as we go. It's casual. It's not an official project. It's something the two of us are doing. I thought of a line this morning, and I'm trying to think if I can remember it. But I thought to myself, I should just write down this line because someone should use this later because it's hilarious. Give me 1 second. Let me see if I can remember. Probably not. Oh, so the line is, imagine, you're talking to artsy people who are interested in music, and you want to poke fun at someone who takes themselves too seriously. And we're chatting, and I say, oh, you remember that guy, dark hair, thinks he's Berlioz, and you say, the Aristocat?
The Aristocat?
Right. That's the line. So for those of you that get it, go ahead and giggle. So if I think of something, I'll jot it down for another project, and there's always kind of that wish list. Yes, sir. I do get impatient with it. And there's a scene in Amadeus where he was the composer chronically late with his work, and people would come up to him, like the producers or the opera house owner, and say, where's the libretto? And he'd go, it's right here. It's in my noodle. It's in my noodle. So yeah, that's really frustrating when you have your idea and it's a matter of putting your fingers to the keyboard or putting your pen to the paper, because there's so much in your head and you have to get it out. What I like is pretending I have a deadline, because even if it's garbage, at least you get it out. And the other thing I like is just creating a skeleton. So my piece didn't start as dialogue. My piece began as a skeleton, and we're going to get into that during the workshop. So if you know your overall plot, you write that down. You look at it a little while later. You go, okay, here's some details. You look at that a little while later. Okay, here's some details. Here's a line I like. So just take it in the little stages. That's what I like to do. Yes, ma'am.
Number 1, gone. Number 2, forgot it. I remember it again. What's your favorite show, or do you have a favorite show or favorite thing to see at Fringe festivals? And then if people aren't going to the Edinburgh trip, how would you suggest going or seeing a Fringe festival if you have no idea what it is?
Okay, those are great questions. So at Fringes, I'm a bit of a sucker for things my friends are in. So the part of my marketing background, if something gets you jazzed, it gets me jazzed. So if someone has their project, I'm like, oh my God, that sounds so great. I'll go see it. So I really like supporting friends. I like things with a little bit of a historical or recognizable edge. And this is something that producers get dinged on, and I get it. So during COVID, a lot of these big Broadway places or big venues or big companies were very fond of saying, when this is all over, we want to tell the important stories. We want to give new artists a chance. And then when they could start seating again, they're like, we're doing Grease with this super famous person. So yeah, you got to pay the bills, but there's something to that. If something's recognizable, people want to come. So I am a little guilty of that myself. If something has a little bit of a historical edge, then I really want to go see it. So if someone's brand new to Fringe, living in a certain area, wanting to learn more about it. We'll use Aberdeen as an example. We've got Kansas City right nearby for their Fringe, and we have Minneapolis. We've got the Minnesota Fringe, which is very large and it's really good. And if I'm not mistaken, Michelle Solomon was involved with one of her pieces when it was virtual. So there's already folks locally who have done Minnesota Fringe or attended or enjoyed it or have been involved in some way. So that's a really good one. It's an artist favorite. There are some that are artist favorite around the world. Orlando is one. Edinburgh is not one because it's so convoluted, but Minnesota is. So that would be a really great start if you haven't done so already. You need to pace yourself and you need to plan. You need to want to make new friends and learn new things. Any other questions?
Well, I'd like to propose we take a 5-minute break before we jump.
Great time.
Thank you so much, everybody.
All right, thank you.